It looks like all of our attendees are coming in. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jamie Shump, president of NYC-CBT. I am so pleased to have our presenters here today for our Black Lives Matter panel discussion about applying social justice in daily clinical practice. Over the past several months, weeks, days, and even hours, we have seen systemic racism, acts of violence, and hate speech. It is of utmost importance as mental health professionals and proponents of evidence-based treatment that we are educated and aware as to how we can promote anti-racist attitudes and behaviors in our work with Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color. Our panelists today are Dr. Karinn Glover and Dr. Dinelia Rosa. We're going to start with Dr. Glover. So welcome, Dr. Glover. Dr. Glover was born and raised in White Plains, New York. Dr. Glover has spent the greater part of her adult life following her interest in science, health, and improving life for the underserved. After graduating from Howard University with a BA in history, Dr. Glover worked at Essence Magazine and then as an account executive for Verizon. She followed her curiosity about medicine and ultimately attended SUNY Downstate College of Medicine and obtained a master's in public health from Columbia University's Mellman School of Public Health via the highly competitive Macy Scholars Program. Currently an assistant professor of psychiatry at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, she teaches psychopharmacology and aspects of psychotherapy to internal medicine and family medicine residents. She is a consulting psychiatrist in the primary care division of Montefiore Health System. In this position, she is a member of a system-wide collaborative care-based program to provide direct psychiatric care to medically and psychosocially complex patients in the Bronx. She has authored a peer-reviewed article on mental disorders in primary care, contributed to a textbook on psychiatric treatment in primary care, and has extensive experience in psychopharmacology and substance disorder treatment. She contributed to various media outlets on a range of topics related to mental health and wellness. She uses mindfulness-based techniques in her psychiatry practice, in her career coaching for professionals from marginalized cultures, and her leadership of discussions of the impact of racism on physical and mental health. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and so excited to get questions and to also hear Dinelia Rosa's presentation as well. So I'm just gonna share my screen.
And as you do that, I am going to say, everybody, please, we're not going to be using the chat function. We're going to use the Q&A function. So please, if you have a specific question for the presenters, you can put it in the Q&A and we will do that at 11 a.m. Thanks.
All right, so I'm Karinn Glover. Thank you for that very warm introduction. And my pronouns are she, her, and let's get started. So my objectives for today's talk are to explore the ways that history informs current sociological conditions, and then consider the impact of discrimination on physical health, and consider the ways discrimination affects the mental health of marginalized populations, and then to look at some of the interesting approaches and conversations that are happening among Black and Brown people, particularly with regard to seeking mental health services and how to do that in a liberated space. So my warning that I give before any talk about race and culture and privilege is that this may be disturbing. It's deeply uncomfortable for me even with this opportunity to sort of advocate for a population that I belong to, and that people sometimes feel embarrassed or angry, ashamed, guilty or sad as we sort of take in some of the information that I'm sharing and discussing. And I invite you to explore your emotions and reflect on them, and let's use this as an opportunity to engage ourselves and others differently. So my caveat is that I'm a cisgendered heterosexual Black woman is that I'm a cisgendered heterosexual Black woman of African American heritage, and that sometimes speaking for other groups is fraught with that I haven't had the experience of others, and yet I'm in the position of advocating for the consideration of some of the needs of populations I don't belong to. Not all people of color understand issues of racism and discrimination in the same way that I do, but I'm gonna try my best. So I'm a psychiatrist. As of July 31st, I was a medical director at Montefiore. I was in charge of the primary care, the delivery of mental health services at 20 primary care sites throughout the Bronx and Lower Westchester. I'm trained in public health. And the other thing to know about me is that I'm the descendant of enslaved West Africans, right? Like I don't know where they come from. My grandparents come from South Carolina, where they essentially came to New York as internally displaced refugees. My grandfather at the age of 12 saw his cousin lynched, and he knew that the South was not safe. So seeking safety, seeking a refuge from state-sanctioned violence, he and like millions of other African Americans migrated north to Harlem, to a major city. My parents were born in Harlem in the 60s. Sorry, they came of age in the 60s, I should say. And so I have a Black father, I have a Black mother, I have two older brothers, both of whom are dark-skinned. And I have had the chance throughout my life to see the way the world has treated them, particularly people in a position of power and privilege, to see the shops that they were not let into, to see the cabs that they could not catch that I could. And sometimes they saw the cabs that I could not catch, right? So I want you to know I bring that to this experience, and to let you know that lots of Black people bring, and lots of Latinx people bring these experiences to the table. We may not talk about them, but this is a really special moment in time to contemplate race and the impact of our racial categorizations on our daily lives and our health. So race, as you can tell, I have an opinion about it. Even though I think it's one of the dumbest concepts ever, it has come to rule our world in many ways. So it's supposed to refer to a group of people who share biological similarities, but it usually means grouping people according to physical appearance, right? And it's a construct proposed by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach in the 1800s. Blumenbach thought that the people from the Caucasus Mountains were the most beautiful. And so he sort of created a hierarchy, if you will, of people, where he thought, well, the people from the Caucasus are the most gorgeous. They're the smartest people I know, right? And so this became science. So part of what I want us to explore is the ways that science reflects the time that we live in. And my desire is that we as clinicians sort of make sure that we're practicing in a way that does not reflect the biases of our time, the racism of our time. So here are the categories he came up with, and then went on to be used along with lots of other theories, particularly the ones that have a eugenics purpose, to categorize humans, have slavery, colonization, the Holocaust, Jim Crow, interethnic hatred, and to even form the basis of medical and psychiatric and psychological diagnoses. One of the things that I have talked about in other talks, especially with residents, is that the diagnosis of drapetomania, which in the 1850s was used to pathologize enslaved people who wanted their freedom, right? So if a enslaved person, right, I'm not using the term slave because I do think that's, it's as if that person was that's all they were. So I find that enslaved is a much more, it respects people's humanity a bit more. So if an enslaved person sought their freedom, they were diagnosed with drapetomania, right? So simply the desire to be thought of as equal for some people was pathological. So I think it's important also to understand that our patients are related to people who socialize them to understand the almost like the codified behaviors and intricacies of racism. So to that end, I think it's important to understand that our patients have probably had early racial socialization experiences, including listening to their parents and their grandparents' stories of living through different periods of racial tension. So it's interesting to me, like over time, that, I mean, I realized that I grew up with a grandfather and he grew up with a grandmother who was an enslaved person. So I grew up hearing about what torture, what trauma our ancestors went through, and it certainly raised my hackles, right? It raised my surveillance, my vigilance even for the actions of our dominant culture, our government, when it comes to Black people and brown people. So there's an underlying fear and anxiety about the consequences of discrimination. So death, physical harm, job loss, unemployment, and even in the therapy space, I think lots of Black and brown people are constantly thinking, either consciously or unconsciously, about how what's happening in the world, and even in the therapy session with somebody who's not of similar background, could be a reenactment of some of the dynamics that have led to harm for our ancestors and for our loved ones. So there's different kinds of racism. You guys know that there's interpersonal, burning a cross on someone's lawn, calling them a name. And then there's systemic racism. And so I'm a big fan of Nancy Krieger, who's out of Harvard School of Public Health, where she talks about the totality of ways societies foster racial discrimination through mutually reinforcing systems. And you can see that the effects of systemic racism are quite far-reaching. So particularly, I reflect often on anti-Black racism because that's what I'm most familiar with. And essentially, and also because I was a history major at a historically Black college. So I went deep in this. Also, I'm the daughter of a history teacher who taught and still teaches African studies and African American history. And so essentially for years, there was physical torture, sex trafficking, human trafficking, that benefited companies, churches, individual and family prosperity. And it went on for hundreds of years, and it involved lots of trauma and lots of terrorism. So we also know that after slavery ended, right, there were Black codes that govern the behavior of Black people, especially in the South. And many of those Black codes are reflected in the ways that law enforcement polices Black people in this day and age. There's also redlining and discriminatory lending practices, and a loss of generational wealth available to most Americans were withheld from Black populations. So I think it's important always to understand that it took generations for Black people to be as successful as they are, and generations to keep Black people and Latinx people way behind on the generational wealth effort, and also to explain kind of where people are as far as their own personal freedom and where they move and where they go. So themes that seem to not disappear are criminalization of Black people, difficulties understanding Black hair, complexion, body habitus is considered a problem often, that children of African descent are suspended in greater number for the same offenses as non-Black children. There's rules around natural hairstyles, what's acceptable and what's not. Black youngsters are routinely assumed to be older than their stated age, incarcerated at higher rates than non-Blacks for similar crimes. And so it also makes me think about what kinds of things we're capturing in our biopsychosocial formulation and what goes into our mental status. A researcher friend of mine, her name is Dr. Ruth Shim. She wrote a book called The Social Determinants of Mental Health. She edited that textbook. And she talks a lot about, in her talks, about doing chart reviews on mental health staff and their renderings of Black and Latinx patients. And one of the things she has found is that often Black hair is considered wild, that Black patients are therefore seen as out of control and wild, that tattoos on Black people are automatically considered gang tattoos, also on the Latinx population as well, whereas white people with tattoos, somehow that goes unmentioned. So I think there's lots of unconscious things that we are bringing to the therapy space sometimes that we really need to be aware of. So again, this is a photo of a Afro-Latina blogger who wears her hair natural. And it reminded me of a time when so my hair is straight because I just got a blowout because I had to get my ends trimmed, but I normally wear my hair quite like this. And on a particularly, on a day when my hair looked like this, one of my coworkers, a white woman, said, "My God, your hair is wild." And I was like, this is a moment. Right? Like, let's talk about your definition of wild and what your default setting for what hair should look like is versus what it is in my community. Because I look at this photo and I look at my own hair when it's natural, and this actually is very, very orderly. It's very tended to. It's, I mean, her curls, as we say, her curls are popping. They're clearly defined. It takes hours to get your hair to look like this. There's effort that goes into this and maintaining this. So Ruth Shim, again, I'm super proud of her work. She talks a lot about principles of social injustice and concepts that she and the residents in her program and on the West Coast at the UC Davis residency program and at UCLA, they're talking about some of these basic ways that are taught to understand populations and then trying to deconstruct it and trying to make sure that it's not infusing the patient doctor space. So in my particular case, I remember, and so I guess I want to preface this by saying that I'm trying to always be aware of my privilege as a woman, as a middle-class person, as somebody who's got lots of education and has been taught to move between spaces for 10 years of my life. I went to private all-girls elite boarding schools. So there's lots of things I don't understand. So my male patients in the South Bronx kept on arriving late for appointments, and they explained that they'd been stopped by the police or had to go to court or got stuck in court. And this is in maybe like 2010, 2011. And they kept on getting arrested. And I was like, what is going on? And a lot of my patients are formerly incarcerated people. And I was like, maybe they're just relapsing and they don't feel comfortable telling me this, right? They have a history of addiction. But then in 2012, researchers, Sewell, I forgot her first name, but Dr. Sewell, S-E-W-E-L-L, if you're interested, she presented all this data on stop and frisk and how innocent Black people and Latinx men particularly were being essentially harassed by the police in the process of them just going about their activities of daily life. And gatherings of 3 or more men of color on a street corner seem to invite police attention and arrest and for loitering. And so I hope that people are aware that there is this tradition in this country going back to the Black codes after slavery, these set of laws that said that Black men could not gather in groups of 3 or more because that was essentially loitering behavior, and they were to be working at all times. Mind you, many Black people could not find work after slavery. Free, right? So they would gather for social support. They were starving. And so if they gathered in public, where else are they going to gather, right? So I just want us to understand that there's this legacy, and then it impacts our lives today and our patients' ability to interact with our system as clinicians in the mental health space. And I think it's also important, like I said, to consider the effect of these interactions with law enforcement on the body. So essentially the chronic exposure to stress tends to activate the hypothalamic pituitary axis and basically cause this release of stress hormones. So stress hormones are awesome if you're trying to outrun a lion or a thief in a dark alley, great. Or a loved one is in danger and you need to run and help them, great. But when you are a person of color, Black, Latinx, trans, for example, and feeling as if you are in a constant sense of danger, and there's lots of documentation that perhaps you actually are in a constant sense of danger, especially if you turn on social media, there will be this chronic exposure to stressful conditions that again affects your blood pressure, your glucose metabolism, which essentially is code for like diabetes, right? And your respiratory health. So Nancy Krieger, that researcher who I mentioned before, talked about that Black people, this research was done in like 1996, she came out with this, that Black people who are aware of racial stress essentially tend to have blood pressure 10 millimeters of mercury higher than any other kind of people, particularly when asked, like, have you experienced discrimination? So I guess I want everybody to be clear about that, I think we're this growing body of knowledge over the past 2 decades about the role of exposure to racism and experiences of discrimination in multiple domains of your life has the potential to affect not only your mood, your anxiety, your level of vigilance, but also literally your blood pressure and the likelihood that you could have a heart attack. Racism is killing people. So here's the SURE study. It was done in 2017, a survey of urban health residents, and it looked at the likelihood of people's interactions with the police and their likelihood of incurring an experience that involved use of force, but also a police action that dehumanized the victim, even without conscious intent. And the results were essentially that people who went through that had not only higher blood pressure, but that if they had a history of cardiovascular disease and a mood disorder, they were going to have worse, poorer health, essentially. So I think this intersection of mood disorders, particularly depression and cardiovascular disease, and the experience of racism puts a whole category of people at higher risk for not only terrible physical health, but also mental health. So I do wonder about the role of psychotherapy and psychopharmacology in preventing heart disease, heart attacks, strokes in Black and Latinx people. And I hope that our goal is to keep on creating liberating, healing spaces for our patients can survive. I mean, you know, I don't mean to be like to be dramatic here, but like sometimes this place feels like the terror dome. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's important to pay attention to even the fact that even though there's maybe the person hasn't had a terrible interaction with the police, nobody burned a cross on my lawn growing up. There's no slavery in the therapy space. So, but it's still important to think through what this person of color is going through in the outside world and then also in the therapy space. And like I said, I mean, I, as a doctor in my medical training, learned all kinds of things that bore traces of I mean, for lack of a better term, reflected the racism of our time. And I was also taught to not speak up, either because when I did, I made people uncomfortable, and I recognized that like my ability to be promoted at work hinged on keeping my boss comfortable and looking good and feeling good, keeping my coworkers comfortable, because the last thing I ever wanted, and I think lots of Black and Latinx people can identify with this, the last thing you want is for your coworkers to say, I don't know, I just don't feel comfortable around Karinn. I don't feel comfortable around this person. When I'm around her, you know, she mentioned things that I just don't get, and they just don't make sense to me, right? And that also, I think, comes up in the therapy space. So it's really important to make therapy a place that doesn't mirror the racial trauma of the outside world. And so I think the way that I, as a doctor, came to understand susceptibility to cancer was that you can be born with a genetic predisposition, but then something happens in the environment to sort of tip the scale towards disease. I am really starting to believe that in the case of structural racism, marginalized people endure multiple hits, and that hopefully therapy is a place to keep those multiple hits and that cumulative stress from affecting the body in disastrous ways. So I do think, I love the idea of cross-cultural mental health. We used to think of it as the way to understand people from exotic lands, the way to understand ethnic minorities, but I hope it's also the understanding of the impact of cultural factors and social determinants of health and physical health and mental health on everyday life of populations. So we want to make mental health a liberating space, like I said, and it comes through asking questions and waiting to have our assumptions challenged, and make sure that we're not assuming that people identify as what we think they are, or who we think they are. And I think it's important to pay attention to movements that are happening among our patients. So I'm on Instagram, and there's this whole community of therapists and patients who are presenting scenarios that they really want therapists to consider. So there are guidelines online for like how to evaluate your therapist. And so there's red flags to watch for, and there's questions to ask of your therapist. Have you done identity work? And what have you personally done to understand yourself as whoever you are, right? As a cisgendered heterosexual woman, what kind of work have I done to understand my privilege, to understand the spaces that I get to move through and be honest with about what I did this weekend or whatever, and still feel like, wherever I go, it's pretty safe for me to say this. So there are lots of concepts that are being talked about online. This is from Melody Lee, a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I think it's really interesting to sort of follow these conversations, because the online space is the new place for people to gather to really make suggestions about how therapy can be done in a way that honors people's differences and their humanity. So I just provide these for an example of ways that people are talking through their own safety in therapy these days. So again, doing a cultural history I think is super important, asking people about these major parts of their identity, like their sexual orientation, their religious and spiritual beliefs, their migration history, asking questions after ascertaining the demographics, like asking people, did they migrate to New York? What was it even like for the person to arrive at their location, like their office? I mean, I know we're remote these days, but back before COVID, I used to ask my patients, how was it for you getting here today? And my patients would sometimes say, you know, there's a security guard who looks at me in a way I don't feel comfortable with. And then that was a source of really good material for our sessions. So I think it's important to keep listening and learning, and I know Dinelia is going to talk about this further, but it's important, I think, to engage the patient about what their diagnosis means to them, and engage the patient about ways their culture can support their recovery. I think it's important to pay attention to the fact that the culture of the clinician and the larger healthcare system governs the societal response to a patient with mental illness. It's important for us to be aware of our own biases, attitudes, and stereotypes. And then to pay attention to the one at the bottom is my favorite, clinical anthropologist syndrome, because you know, more self-disclosure, when I first started seeing transgender patients, I was so curious about their world and their process that I am absolutely sure I went off track because I was so curious. I didn't know where to look for the information. When I did go looking, I went to lectures, and they were, again, because I'm a physician, they were all about, from a very physician-driven perspective, like here are the hormones, here's how you make sure they don't cause blood clots, things like that, which are useful. But in the session with the patient, I failed. So I think it's also important to take into account people's spirituality, and especially for people who are navigating these times, I think it's really critical to take a look at what's keeping them strong. And I want to also, I'm going to speed through just a little bit because I want us to consider the language that we're using with our patients. I've stopped using the term criminal justice system. I started to use the word carceral because the more I learn about how our system works, I find it is not just. I've stopped calling people drug addicts. I just recently took a boards examination question that focused on a patient with malignant narcissism, and they called the person antisocial because a patient being discussed had done sex work. And I thought, like, how crazy is it to call people, in fact, I'm going to stop using the term crazy, but like how terribly offensive is it to call somebody who had engaged in sex work a prostitute and therefore having antisocial traits, when my patients who engage in sex work are doing it for their survival. So in any event, something to think about: cannabis versus marijuana, because marijuana is a term that that seems to have been used to sort of other and malign people from other countries, particularly Latin America. And then also to pay attention to the term substance abuse versus substance use. Using the term abuse seems to really connote some very negative stereotypes and traits. I think it's important to help our patients connect with apps that are going to help them, but according to their culture. So I think it's also really important to let our patients know that there are online resources for them, particularly for self-management in between appointments, and that reflect their culture. There's also The Difference, which is another startup that's owned by a woman of color, and it has a very diverse staff, and they're trained in structural competency. There are online directories for our patients to find therapists of color, therapists who are familiar with their community. And I think I bring this up because I really want all of us to be aware that communities are organizing to be able to find like-minded therapists, or therapists who are not going to dehumanize them, or at least with the hope that the therapists won't dehumanize them. And I think it's important to pay attention and partner with some of these organizations if you want to be a resource. And so here are the links to some of the talks that and podcasts and articles that I found really interesting and have fed my mind and nourished my knowledge base. And again, I refer to Nancy Krieger, Carl Hart there at the bottom on an episode of What's Happening with Chris Hayes. And David Williams is a researcher at Harvard School of Public Health. And he talks a lot about the impact of racial trauma and racism on the physical and mental health of Black and Brown people. And I just want to thank Ruth Shim, who I mentioned before, Ayanna Jordan, who's a psychiatrist up at Yale, for help and guidance on basically how to convey what are very, very tough concepts and very painful things, because I think we're all just really, really dedicated to this work. So that's that on that. And I'm going to turn it back to you guys.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Glover. That was fantastic. We are going to turn now to Dr. Dinelia Rosa. Dr. Rosa is director of the Dean Hope Center for Educational and Psychological Services, the training clinic at Teachers College, Columbia University. She obtained her clinical psychology degree at the Derner Institute at Adelphi University. Dr. Rosa is a founding member of the Health Psychology Rotation in the Bellevue NYU Internship Program. For the past 15 years, Dr. Rosa volunteers in Latino Share, a nonprofit organization offering support groups to women survivors of breast and ovarian cancer. There, she ran focus groups for a novella project aimed at developing a Spanish written story in a soap opera format to educate Latinas about breast cancer in a culturally sensitive way. In 2010, she co-authored the book Grief Therapy with Latinos, Integrating Culture for Clinicians with Dr. Carmen Vasquez. Dr. Rosa is a founding member of the Division of Culture, Race, and Ethnicity at New York State Psychological Association. And in 2014, Dr. Rosa became NYSPA's first Latino president. She is also very active at the APA, serving as a diversity delegate representing NYSPA in advocacy efforts, past president in 2017 of the APA Division of State, Provincial, and Territory State Associations, Board of Professional Affairs, and most currently, commissioner on the APA Commission of Accreditation. Dr. Rosa is a current facilitator at the APA Diversity Leadership Training Institute as well. She has been invited to speak in radio and television, offer seminar on mental health issues with the Latino community to professionals and community-based organizations. She is recipient of the 2007 NYSPA Service Award, and in 2016, she received the highly recognized Carl F. Heisner APA Presidential Award for advocacy for her work during her presidency in NYSPA to pass a neurotechnician bill. Dr. Rosa also has a small private practice in Spanish bilingual psychological and psychoeducational evaluations for children in foster care. Welcome so much, Dr. Rosa, and we ask that questions be directed to the Q&A, not the chat, and feel free to keep the questions coming. Welcome. Oh, you are on mute.
Yeah, I always
There we
forget
are.
her. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today. I'm very excited and having this opportunity. And I would like to start by talking a little bit about me. In addition to that, I am I'm a Latina, and I was born here in the Lower East Side, New York, but when my parents took me back to Puerto Rico, where I grew up, and I was raised there. My primary language is Spanish. I've been in the United States for the last 30 years. The reason why I came back was because I wanted to complete a PhD. At that time, 30 years ago, there was no PhD in Puerto Rico. Now there is. And then one thing led to the other. I saw the needs of the Latino community in New York City, and opportunities to stay and work with the Latino community here came up, and I stayed. Before working in Teachers College, I worked in the inner city areas of all different boroughs. I worked in the South Bronx. I worked in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, the Lower East Side, Uptown. So I had the opportunity for 18 years to be directly working with the population that is in my heart, the Latino community. Why I ended up in higher ed was because I realized that a lot of students, after they graduated and went to work in our communities, I found that there was a disconnect. Their heart and willingness to work with the population was there, but somehow something was missing. And when this opportunity of running the clinic at TC came up, I thought about potentially this being an opportunity to increase awareness on students early in their training about the issues that are relevant and important when you work in inner city populations. One thing that I want to say before I start also is that the presentation is about Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We have to be aware that we do deal with people that are Indigenous, even though we might not know it, because of the intersectionality between all these three levels. We might be working with a Latino that you think that is just a Latino from maybe a city from the country they're coming from, and they might be a member of an Indigenous community of the Latino of a Latino country. We have Native Americans in the United States, but we also have Indigenous populations in all Latin American, South America, Central American, and the Caribbean. So one of the things to be aware of when we're working with Latinos is not to keep them in a silo of what we think a Latino is, but to be ample in our appreciation and understanding and exploring if this person is also a member of an Indigenous community. My hope in this presentation, and I really appreciate Karinn's presentation. I always feel that I learn so much from other presenters, and I did learn a lot from your presentation, Karinn. My hope in this presentation is to increase awareness about why it's important for us as clinicians to be aware of many of the things that Karinn mentioned, and that our clients come in with that narrative of those histories. One other thing I forgot to say is that I was training at Delphi, so I am not an expert on CBT. My training was primarily psychodynamic. However, I respect and honor CBT because I know that even when I work with people long term, they need skills and they need mechanisms to deal with the here and now, while another level of process might take longer. So I think that they are not mutually exclusive. They could coexist. And more than ever, you hear about the integrative psychotherapy, which is the opportunity to integrate both knowledges to help people. So again, I think that only after there's a genuine recognition that we also carry our own potential biases, we as clinicians will be able to be more honest and transparent with our clients. We are trained, like 80% of our training, if not more, is focused on how to help others. Very minimal goes into how to go through a process of self-reflection so that I could become a better clinician. Why it's important for me to be aware that I might have biases. Let's start with that. Do I have biases, right? So why that is important is because we have to take a look at the history of the United States. And again, some of this was already mentioned by Karinn. But even though we are a diverse country, even though we are a country of opportunities, right, for people from different countries, race, ethnicity, we do have a history. The United States has a history that shapes by a long and entrenched history of oppression. And this was already mentioned in the colonization of indigenous population people, the enslavement of Africans, and the last one, which is also very important, is label-based exploitation. So many people from Latin American countries were brought to this country to help in the development of the country many years ago. And even today, right, a lot of the produce in our lands are basically people that are coming from other countries, basically Latin American countries. We also know the history about the exploitation of Chinese, creating the train trails in West Coast and primarily, but also in the East. But what about now? I mean, we are not exempt of what's going on. There are things going on, and I know that this is one of the things that motivated this presentation, is what's going on now. During the first 18 months of Trump's presidency, his administration implemented a Muslim ban, preventing entry from predominantly Muslim countries. So here was an attack against people based on the religion. The Trump administration has targeted immigrants in other ways as well. For example, more people have been deported. More asylum, people are seeking asylum have been deported. And we also see that families have been separated, right? Children have been separated from their parents. And the impact of that has emotionally and psychologically has been ignored because that has not been the priority in this administration. The Trump administration view race relations reflect deep-seated racist beliefs. For instance, Donald Trump failed to condemn the act of white supremacy, and we also heard that last night, so fresh as last night. And as mentioned before, the mass incarceration has increased 500% in the last 40 years. The war on drugs, with more than 60% of the prison population being people from Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. There is a documentary in Netflix, probably many of you have seen it. I recommend it. It's called 13. And it talks about it's a documentary by Ava DuVernay, exploring the intersection of race, justice, and mass incarceration in the United States, and how this is a way of oppressing people of color, Black and people of color, but in a different way that is endorsed and supported by the system. We also see slavery has been perpetuated since the end of the American Civil War, but what's happening now? What's happening now is that there's still a war through criminalizing behavior and enabling the police to arrest poor freedmen and force them to work for the state on their convict leasing. The suppression of African Americans by disenfranchisement, lynching, Jim Crow, political declaring the war, and even now, it boils down to what we are seeing with police brutality and violence, which sparkled the movement that we know now and that we hear about a lot, Black Lives Matter. The other piece that we cannot ignore is the white privilege, right? So we live in a society that promotes and endorses the core values of white culture. Now, some part that is important to difference here, we're not saying that white people don't go through their own personal struggles. They do. But there is a fact that we cannot deny, and is that white privilege is having greater access to power and resources than people of color. White privilege is where the society, and the society that we live in here, promotes and endorses values that are consistent with the white culture. So therefore, people from the white culture have things, easy access to resources, easy access to many things that people that don't belong to that white group can. White people become more likely to move through the world with an expectation that their needs are readily met. People of color move through the world knowing that their needs are on the margins, right? White privilege is not having to worry about acceptance or discrimination. It is a choice. If somebody that belongs to white privilege, for them, it's a choice to think about discrimination. It's a choice to think about people that are marginalized. The difference for people that are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, Latinos, is that in the white privilege environment, they don't have a choice. They have to think about and worry about discrimination all the time. It's always in their mind, and it's always in their movements. And this is why when Karinn was presenting, and research shows that, you know, people that come from marginalized groups and have an increased risk for anxiety, depression, and physical ailments. So how are biases manifested? And I was thinking, okay, so from my perspective, I could think about transference and countertransference, and I appreciate that Karinn brought it in her presentation, but how will it look like for somebody that doesn't necessarily believe in transference and countertransference, a clinician that will probably believe in both, but not necessarily include them in their treatment of the client. So what I thought about is, and I'm sure that you as a CBT expert will think about other techniques or other approaches from the CBT perspective. But what I thought is automatic thoughts, and particularly negative automatic thoughts in response to a trigger. And they're often outside of that person's conscious awareness, right? So as a product of the US culture, individuals will develop a negative automatic thoughts around issues of diversity and social justice within society based on their experiences, most of them out of the conscious awareness. So this is, I believe that this is a fact, right? In the sense that growing up in an environment where there is so much social injustices, right? Where there is a diversity of issues going on, then we are going to internalize some automatic thoughts about some of those experiences. And when I say we, I'm talking about not only clients, but us as therapists. We are going to internalize some of those thoughts, either positive or negative. So here's an example. Therapists are not exempt, right? And how many times maybe a therapist might think, I'm afraid of Black men. And these are people, these are thoughts that we don't share with people, but they're there. Or those are thoughts that we're not aware they're there, right? They just pop out in a certain situation, but then they go back into the hidden, and you might not think it's an issue, right? Another automatic thought could be Black men are violent. Or one that you hear a lot now, all Black Lives Matter protesters are looters and thugs, right? So these are examples of some of those automatic thoughts that we might have, and sometimes we don't know where they're coming from. Now, the challenge for us as clinicians is that if we don't keep those in check, if we don't become aware of them and we don't keep them in check, then those are going to interfere in the relationship that you want to have with your client. If a client is a member that represents any of those particular groups for which you as a clinician have negative automatic thoughts. So what can we do? The first thing that we want to do is that we need to recognize those thoughts, right? And that could be a challenge because some of them are not in our awareness. We need to recognize them and accept that we all have them. I, as a Latina woman, have my own struggles that I constantly have to deal with. I have to be aware that Latinos are not all the same, that there are differences. I have to accept that as a Latina, that born in Puerto Rico, automatically I have US citizenship, puts me in a different level as compared with other Latinos that come from other countries other than Puerto Rico, right? I need to be aware that working with a Cuban, for example, coming from a communist country, my relationship with the Latina might have to be different than somebody that comes from the Caribbean, another country from the Caribbean where I feel close because Puerto Rico is part of the Caribbean, right? I might have also some automatic thoughts about people that come from a communist country, or that I'm not aware of. And they might not be triggered until I'm in the room with a Cuban person. And then I realize, oh, you know, I do have some perceptions that might be biases against the person that is in the room with me. Not necessarily the person, but what that person represents in the room with me. So again, another thing I thought is, how do we deal with this? Well, so we have to explore the credible, and this is what we might do, and this is what some of the, I suspect some of the CBT clinicians will do, which is explore the credible evidence for the negative automatic thought, right? So in this case, the experience of my client probably is, I had 2 negative experiences in my young adulthood with Black men, right? All clinician that will say, well, when I was growing up, I had 2 negative experiences in my young adulthood with Black men. So that will explain, right, why I do have this negative automatic thought. The other side of the coin is, okay, let's explore the credible evidence against the negative automatic thought, right? And this is easy to say than to do, right? So how do I change that negative thought to not all Black men are violent? Not all Black Lives Matter protesters are looters, right? So how do I substitute a negative thought or a thought where I'm generalizing to the whole population to a different way of thinking, where I am not generalizing and where I am not owning that negative automatic thought? So another way of doing this is being self-reflective, right? And again, in the dynamic context, what I'm talking about when I'm saying as therapists, we might have our own negative automatic thoughts is part of that countertransference, right? So when I talk to my students, I always tell them, when you're having a response to something the client is telling you or bringing to the room, we need to tease out what belongs to the relationship, right? I'm feeling a current countertransference reaction. What belongs to what's happening in the room, but what belongs to me that is being triggered by my interaction with the client? So in the very old classic psychodynamic work, it was very easy to just project back to the client and say, okay, because I'm experiencing this reaction about what's happening in the room, then X, Y, or Z. And there was an interpretation thrown to the client about the client, right? Because we were supposed to stay out of the relationship. But now what we are emphasizing is, no, we do not come to the room, to the therapeutic room, as a tabula rasa, as it used to be, right? We are part of the same context that our clients are. I'm a product of being 30 years in a society where white privilege prevails. Even if I was in Puerto Rico, the influence and relationship of the United States with Puerto Rico, white privilege will prevail. So I'm a product of that. And I need to be constantly struggling and thinking about keeping an eye of what's the impact of that on my relationship with my clients. So one of the things that I emphasize to the students is, we need to be aware. The more you are aware about where you're coming from and what your biases might be, the more you will be able to deal with them, and the more you will be able to then be more present with the client in a genuine way. So I'm going to skip this, but basically, is what do you do when you want to overcome negative thoughts? you could teach me that better than I to you. So working out, what about working with clients? So, okay, we have our own biases. The clients also come to the therapy room with their own biases, right? So, for example, they also have the automatic thoughts. Once they come into a room, and if they belong to one of the groups that are not part of the majority, they're probably, I'm putting an example here, all white people are trash, right? And that could be an automatic reaction that the client is going to have, right? And the client is going to react to you in a way based on that automatic thought. Or the other side of this coin will be, all white people and doctors are wonderful and great. They have all the wisdom, right? That would be a positive automatic thought. But either way, the client is going to respond to you based on that internal automatic thought they're having about the difference in the room, be it the gender, but in this case, we're focusing on ethnicity and race, right? The client may be expecting criticism or rejection from the therapist, right? If they do say something like that, and some clients do say it, believe me. And they're used to being rejected, being attacked if the statement is negative, or they feel that they're going to be loved and be taken in by you if it's the other example, right? All white doctors are great and have wonderful wisdom. Either way, we need to keep an eye on that, because we will be feeding into the expectations they have based on that automatic thought. And what we want to do is, if we are not aware of our own biases, we will fit into it, right? We will fit into either one of them. And I think I have an example here. Here's an example. So if the client is coming saying thinking that all white people or white therapists are trash, and then you as a therapist have your own automatic thoughts about all blacks hate us, all black people don't like us or don't like me because I'm white, then we're having a clash of automatic thoughts in the room, right? And the danger with that is that then you take it personal, just like the client is going to be taking it personal. You as a therapist will take it personal, and then this will be a recipe for disaster, because the interventions are not going to be on behalf of helping the relationship, but it will be detrimental. In this case, both client and clinician are struggling with their own negative automatic thoughts about each other in the room. And that will not help at all. But then the burden is on us. If that's the scenario, the burden is on us as therapists to be aware of what is my potential bias. Because if you are aware of your potential bias, you might be able to deal with it before going into a room with a client where you have not, like I like to say to the students, where you have not metabolized your own bias, right? We need to be able to metabolize, what does this mean to me? How will I react if I have somebody that might perceive me as this grandiose person? Or how will I defer to me, right? Or how will I feel if I'm with a person that doesn't want to work with somebody that represents the Caucasian race, right? If the burden is on us, because it's the only way that we could be able to go to the room better prepared to then help the client in fighting any of those negative thoughts and biases. Okay, I'm almost finished. As a therapist, we are responsible of becoming aware of our own biases and perceptions and misperceptions. We need to recognize that we are the product of a society where white privilege prevails, and we're not fitting into that model becomes the group that is alienated, right? And it's the group that we're talking about here. As a member of white privilege, you have the choice not to think about these important issues. Members of disadvantaged and stigmatized communities do not have the privilege to decide whether or not to think about discrimination and alienation. So the work starts at home, right? And that's why I wanted to title the presentation this way. It's very easy for us to learn all different techniques and approaches to help people. And we could use that same knowledge on ourselves, right? We could change our way of thinking. We could be in check of our thinking process. We could reduce our own biases and prejudices. I know that we encourage therapists can benefit from their own psychotherapy. And this is a space where some of these things can be sorted out. But that's not the only space where these things can be sorted out. Us as clinicians, we could find many other ways where we could sort out what are my biases, what are the things that I have difficulty dealing with, what are the things that I don't feel comfortable dealing with. And doing so will increase clinicians' genuineness, and that is so important in a therapeutic relationship. It will increase transparency with your clients. And the clients will pick it up, believe me or not. I always say that we do a mental status on clients, but they do a mental status on us. They do assess, is this person taking me in? Is this person being genuine in their efforts to help me? And that will increase the trust in the diet and the therapeutic relationship. And here are some references. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Rosa. That was great. I see some questions coming in already from the attendees. Anybody who has a question, if you want to direct it to a specific presenter, please, let us know. I am gonna just start broadly. Somebody had asked, racism is often associated with psychopathology, paranoia, projection, aggression. Is there a cogent argument to be made to classify racism as a mental disorder? Anybody want to take that?
So I think the only thing, I remember when, I think Alvin Poussant, the psychiatrist who consulted on the Cosby Show, he's a Harvard psychiatrist, he had put that forth, I think back in the 80s, and it was shot down by both APAs. But part of it is because racism is so common, it is so international, so worldwide, that we'd be diagnosing everybody with it. So that's the one main argument that stuck with me, because otherwise I was like, diagnose the hell out of these people, put them all away. But yeah, no.
Dr. Rosa, do you have thoughts?
I agree with Karinn.
Okay. So another question we have is, how can a therapist create a comfortable setting for their clients of a different race? How can the therapist not be dismissive of a client's views or trauma regarding race? How do you as a therapist get the client of a different race or culture to understand your point of view without having a negative label attached?
Wow, that's a very general, there's a lot of stuff in that question. I will start by saying that becoming aware of the fact that there is somebody with a different experience, with a different narrative, with you in the room. I don't think there is a cookbook that tells you how do you do that, and unfortunately there isn't. Should I put more egg pictures on my room? Should I put something? No, it's not so much about that. It's about how you as a human being hold the space with somebody that is different from you. And you honor the fact that that person is different. It's all about awareness, because if you're not aware of it, you might dismiss some aspects of it. You might alienate some aspects of it without realizing it. So that's why for me, it's so important that we become aware and sensitive about the fact that we are dealing with people from different backgrounds, different experiences. Because if as a clinician, I don't do that, then I'm at risk of putting everything at risk, and losing my relationship with the client. And unfortunately, not all the clients are going to be so openly verbal to say, I'm leaving because you're being insensitive with me. They will walk out and you never know why they walked out. So again, the burden is on us developing that sense of awareness and sensitivity.
I agree. I think to me, it is all about holding the space and tolerating our own discomfort with knowing that somebody wakes up in a different body than what we've got, right? And they go through the world like in a different way that I may never know. So I think that I literally, I think being quiet for that is super important, because one of the worst things that can happen in a therapy session is when this person brings this like tender part of their existence, their most vulnerable moment, and the therapist says, "Is that what you really think happened?" I had the experience of but not being able to get a taxi one day, and I had to rely on an older white couple to get a taxi for me, and so when I got to work, I was telling a coworker about that, and she said, "That didn't happen." She literally said, "That didn't happen." And she said, "Well, it's always hard to get a taxi on 2nd Avenue. And I was like, "Do you, non-Black person, have to recruit white people to get one for you?" And that was the moment, right? But keep in mind, like, I'm 40 something, right? I had that response cocked and loaded, but I came to her in a very vulnerable state. So just imagine in the therapy setting, when your client says something like that, it's important to really just sit with it.
I see an important question that was just raised that I think can also be tagged on to some other questions that people have. So one person wrote, "I met with a client who stated, 'I'm Jewish and cannot accept the BLM movement because they are against my people.' As a therapist, I was caught off guard because I know that's not true. I found myself defending the BLM movement. How should I have handled that?" That was the question framed by the participant. And I'm also going to tack onto that, you know, if we are strongly pro BLM, obviously, and we are confronted with a patient who is pretty racist, or just generally like maybe like white privilege and kind of not part of the movement, but we so strongly as therapists believe in it, is there a line that we can't cross? Like, how would you kind of advise us or guide us to discuss this sort of stuff with patients right now?
Well, like I said before, I mean, that's a very good example. Like I said before, the first thing is that we want to be able to step back and not be immediately reactive. Because if we're immediately reactive, what you are doing is that you're responding to some of your gut feelings more than a clinician about how this is triggering you, okay? Either one way or the other. So we have to have that ability of listening, hearing, holding it. Like Karinn said, let's hold the space. And while I'm holding that space, I'm stepping back. And then I go back in a way that will be a little bit more rational to then explore where those thoughts are coming from, right? So what are the experiences that are feeding this thought for this person, this way of thinking for this person? With the statement is very generalized, right? So yeah, how to deal with somebody racist in the room is a big challenge, because, you know, and I'm glad you're saying that, because it's important to say that not all people that are part of white privilege are completely disconnected from this reality, right? There are many allies that are struggling with these issues. And what I will say is, let's just be able not to be reactive and to hold it. And it could be that you might have not address it for a while. You might have to hold that thought for many sessions before you bring it up, because you want to feel that you have a strong relationship with the person before you could delve into those topics. Otherwise, you will lose the person, right? Because like I said before, the person is expecting a reaction from you, right? The patient is assessing, okay, my therapist is white, but is she on my side or is she on the other side? Let me see. And again, this is not in their awareness, right? Let me see how she responds to my statement. And basically what they're doing is testing you to see if you could hold them, even with the thoughts they might see being bizarre way of thinking. And you need to prove them that yes, that you could hold them to then address this later on.
I have nothing to add to that. I think that's a fabulous response, and it's exactly what I was thinking. Absolutely.
So you're saying we shouldn't start debating with them?
Fighting the patient, never good.
Okay,
but I also think, sorry, just one more thing, sorry, just occurred to me, that often thoughts like that are part of this lots of black and white thinking, right? And thinking in terms of polarities, like either, and so looking for the theme of that, because I'm sure it's expressed in other aspects of the person's life.
Absolutely, thank you. We have another question saying, I had a question to either presenter about their thoughts on cultural aspects being appropriated by American/white culture. How to use these instances to advocate for your own culture or to manage and acknowledge feelings of frustration towards the hypocrisy of this. Does anyone else follow that one?
I guess I wonder about, so that seems like like separate from therapy. That's just sort of like, how do I deal with it? Right. Okay. So I feel like my first experience with that was I was like 6 years old, and I think Bo Derek was in the movie 10, and she had like cornrows in her hair, right? And like cornrows was how my mom did my hair. And I remember feeling, and my mom used to put like cowrie shells in it, because like she had gone to Nigeria and brought back all these shells, and right. So I remember my mom pointed out that here was this woman being celebrated for wearing her hair in this style that our ancestors had been wearing for millennia, right? And she was celebrated, or even Kim Kardashian put her hair in cornrows, or at least put on a cornrow wig or something, right? And she gets celebrated for like snatching these little bits of culture, but not having the lived experience, the trauma of being Black in America, right? She hasn't lived that experience, but she likes to be proximal to it, right? Because in lots of ways in this country, we value this, that when somebody is white, but they can like sort of choose like a salad bar, like which parts of other people's cultures they want to put on like a costume and then claim to be close to. So I don't know the way out of that frustration. I acknowledge it, but I just feel like it's just one more thing that has the potential to raise my blood pressure about this country. And so I practice mindfulness.
I like that. Mindfulness, absolutely. I will add to that, you know, we could define it in different ways, the country being hypocritical or not. What I think is the bind in which we, people of different groups, are put in this country, where, you know, it's an illusion that we're being accepted, right? It's an illusion that we're being integrated into this diverse culture. But yet we still see systemic racism through institutions, through other aspects that are embedded deeper than just in you know, seeing a Chinese restaurant on each block, or a Mexican restaurant on each block. But the reality is that it doesn't mean, yes, it gives the illusion that there's an integration, but there's still, behind the scenes, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this country. There's still this double message, right? So I am good, which is so very interesting. I am good to clean houses in Larchmont or Rochelle, or New Rochelle, Westchester, but I am not good to live there, right? So I am good to clean the landscapes and the gardens of people in the neighborhood, but they want me to live far away, even if it takes me 2 hours to get to clean the lawn. So that's the double bind that we are put on all the time, and behind the illusion that we are integrated.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. One is related to some of the the discussion that, that both of you had about identity exploration. So should we be talking about our own identity exploration with our clients, with some of our clients? When would we start this? In the beginning of treatment or as the relationship grows? And I think some of this was, Dr. Glover had mentioned in her slides, and so did you, Dr. Rosa. What are some of the resources out there to facilitate identity exploration? There was some language that Dr. Glover was going through, but I think it was toward the end, so it was a little quick. I was trying to take notes. Okay.
So I'm happy to share my slides. I just have to convert them to PDF. But yeah, I wholeheartedly support people doing their identity work. I think a big part of it is with a patient. Like, I was taught in my residency program to just start with my first visit with a patient of a different background, or even of a similar background, to just acknowledge either the difference or the similarity and ask the patient, like, how do you feel about the fact that I am a younger clinician, or that I am African American and you are not? And what comes to mind? And to really, like, it's in the room with us anyway, so like we might as well just talk about it.
I will add to that you know, I would take probably a different approach, in the sense that and you know, this is not about this right or wrong. I mean, we all have different approaches to deal with this. I usually like to wait for the timing of the client, in terms of talking about any sensitive issue related to culture, race, and even if they talk about it, when they start talking about it at the beginning, like I said before, they're testing the waters to see if this is a safe place to talk about it. And I want to reinforce that to eventually be able to talk about it. We all know that people will open up more when they feel safer in the environment. So the yes that they might tell you at the beginning might be very different from the yes that they're going to tell you 3 months down the road. Now, what do you do in a situation like Karinn's work, right? Where she has to prescribe medication, she might not be able to wait 3 months. Or if you want to manualize format of intervention, you might not be able to do that. You might not be able to, okay, let me wait until the relationship, right? And maybe we need to be perceptive. Is there any interference in the job that I'm doing? Either prescribing medication or doing a manualized format. Is there some interference on that? And add to those criteria that you might think why the client is blocking the progress, add also cultural aspects. And then maybe then you might feel comfortable to address those with the client. In terms of self-exploration and identity, I would say both inside the room and outside the room, they could happen. There's a lot of literature now, and one of our professors in TC have written a lot about self-disclosure and psychotherapy, right? So self-disclosure is healthy. It's good for the diet in the room. The one thing that I advise is that you want, and I always tell this to my students, you want to make sure that when you're self-disclosing on behalf of the client, not for our own narcissism, right? And I could give you an example in the culture aspects, right? So I had many years ago a student who was white, but she spent many years in Mexico and spoke very perfect Spanish. And she was assigned a Spanish client, and she felt the urge and the need to let know the client that she had this experience and that she spoke Spanish. The client was bilingual, right? So she will speak English. And, you know, so then again, do I just self-disclose that I speak Spanish to make it easier to the client? Is the client okay with switching to Spanish? Maybe the client does not want to. There's a lot of research that talks that shows that emotions are attached to language, and the relationship of primary relationship with objects, attachments, are related to language as well. So, you know, if we know that literature, then we might hold back and saying and self-disclosing, hey, I speak Spanish. I probably will respect the timing of the client in terms of me being able to speak to language. I will then go by what's the language that the client prefers at this moment. And eventually she might change to the other language. So again, is yes, you can self-disclose, but how comfortable you feel the self-disclosing, and are you doing it on behalf of the client, not on behalf of you? And then outside, in addition to all the resources that Karinn share, I believe in support groups, I mean, colleagues, supervision groups among colleagues. We could brainstorm together and do this kind of dialogue. It's a dialogue that could take time. And it's a dialogue that if it's a group, everybody has to be on the same boat on wanting to do this. Sometimes we live our life so rushed, right? And so fast, and so many clients backed up back to back, that we don't allow the space for us to think about these things with the time it deserves. So, creating the space to do this is very important.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
A couple more questions coming in kind of related to what we're talking about right now. In particular, one person's asking about, in addition to kind of stepping back and as clinicians being aware of our own negative automatic thoughts or biases or just the sort of internalized racism that we all carry around with us, more logistically, how to actually share something like that, or as the person puts in the question, how to put our own countertransference on the table with somebody in the room while preserving a therapeutic relationship, or either presenter.
Well, I could think if I do have a relationship with a client that that is already established, right? I would probably, and if it's a person that represents white, the majority at large, I would probably say, how do you feel about the fact that your therapist is not from American culture, from the white culture? How do you feel about the fact that I'm a Latina? And not only a Latina, but a Latina with an accent, because English is not my primary language, right? I will say something like that. And why I will bring that up is because it's not what the norm in the society usually expect you to see. So in a way, we are here creating something that is different from what is expected in the outside world. So how do you feel about that? So that will be an example, but I will not do that at the beginning because I know I'm going to lose the client, right? I will have to feel that I have a therapeutic relationship with that person.
I was wondering, in addition to giving that space to validate the experience, to process what this patient has gone through, even just getting to your office, how else can we, given that we're CBT people and we're pretty focused on not just process but then also action, how do we help our patients live in this world, right? How do we do that?
I love that question. That is sort of why I wake up in the morning. It's sort of like, how do I help my patients get through this world? Like, I use the term terror dome, like among my friends and colleagues, because I think that's real. Like, people are navigating their history right in the present moment. They are processing external stimuli while synthesizing it through the lens of how they were raised and the wisdom and the distortions that they were given during their childhood. So for me, it's really about helping my patient be in touch with their automatic thoughts, and then giving them the tools or helping them discover the tools within that can help them distinguish as quickly as possible. Just where is this coming from? And doing that self-investigation. There's so many automatic thoughts that like, I think marginalized people in this country are sort of given when they're kids for their survival, right? Like, and so it is literally the process of helping them become more observant of those thoughts, and then figuring out, like, how do you feel in response to those? Because my goal is to not only say, have my patient be able to recognize, I passed a cop, he reminded me of my rapist, right? or I applied for this job and the job interview went south because this person reminded me of XYZ. And how do I approach these challenges without becoming overwhelmed by the past? And then I think also it's this building a certain tolerance and a certain even approach to outlets for people's anxiety about this moment. So I have like helped my patients be in touch with their city council member. If they're living in substandard housing, literally, I'm like, you know, I got a pill for that, but it's not going to do all of it. And maybe your activism and my help with this is actually where the liberation is. So, you know, I wasn't taught that in residency, but it felt right. And then I started asking other psychiatrists and they were like, do it, because Lexapro is not going to help you get better. Lexapro is not housing. Housing is housing.
That's
the other thing that comes to mind is that we could work on segments, right? Tapping a little bit on what you said, Karinn. You don't have to do all the changes in the person that you're working with, right? If you are aware that this person might also be dealing with other issues related with social justice, with discrimination, doesn't mean that you have to address them. You could do your program for the anxiety that came in, which, by the way, the anxiety probably is deeper and related to discrimination and whatnot, but it doesn't mean that you need to cover all the bases. That's why integrative psychotherapy is good. That's why we psychologists are diverse in our approaches, because you could do one part, and your sensitivity is going to help connect the person with another services, just like the example that Karinn said, right? So it's not that you need the sensitivity to create change on the person, but your sensitivity around these issues will empower you to help them in other ways, in addition to the way you could help them.
Thank you both so much for everything. The presentations are so timely in light of, we talked a little bit before you all came on, what we watched last night, what we've been seeing in the country, and how best to help our patients. So we really appreciate your time and wisdom. For all attendees, if panelists will give us copies of slides if they want to, we hope to have it up and distribute, or maybe on our website. This was video recorded, so if you want to review and look at things a little bit more closely, that should be up soon. And I encourage everybody to, if you're not a member of NYC-CBT, please consider joining. We'd love to have you in the community.